The taste of salt still lingered on my lips when I opened the cabin door for the first time. My seaside hideaway, finally my own. I didn't need Seattle anymore, nor those endless meetings back at the architecture office. At 38, I traded skyscrapers for the endless horizon along the Maine coast, where the waves have been carving stories into the rocks for millennia. My name is Daniel. 3 months ago, when I finalized my divorce, I promised myself that I'd start over in a place where I could really hear my own thoughts. My Uncle Mitchell's unexpected inheritance made that possible. He was a retired shipbuilder who had spent decades living isolated on this forgotten piece of coastline. If you've ever felt that city life smothers who you really are, give this a like. This story will show you that sometimes you have to lose everything before you can truly find yourself. The wooden cabin sits perched over dark rocks that slope right down into the sea. On stormy days, sea spray splashes against the bedroom windows. On calm mornings, the mist transforms everything into a grayscale painting. The smell of pine and salt hangs over every inch of this place. I learned to make my coffee with the soundtrack of seagulls and the wind whispering through the cracks in the old walls. My routine here has almost become ritualistic. I wake up with the first rays of sun, brew a strong coffee in my rusty kettle, and walk along the beach collecting wood washed ashore by the tide. I restored the old shed at the back of the property, turning it into my workshop. There, I transformed scraps of wood into little sculptures, miniature boats, seabirds, whales. I'm no artist, but my hands needed to create something real after years of just drawing plans that never left paper. In the afternoon, I fished from the small deck. At night, I read those old nautical books my uncle left behind. The days follow one another, carried by the rhythm of the tides. I have no commitments besides the ones I set for myself. No expectations beyond the next storm or the next spectacular sunrise. It was on a bitterly cold Monday when my routine started to unravel. While I was trying to fix a leak in the roof, I heard the unmistakable sound of an engine sputtering. I rushed down to the beach and saw a small boat struggling against increasingly fierce waves. The motor was coughing and then stopping. The man on board looked disoriented, rowing unsuccessfully against a current that was pushing him toward the rocks. I grabbed my own boat and sailed against the rising tide. When I reached the vessel, the stranger was already drenched and pale. "Hold on tight!" I shouted over the wind, tossing a rope that he caught with trembling hands. Ethan, as I later learned his name was a 42-year-old wildlife photographer, with his dark tousled hair, scruffy stubble, and calloused hands that didn't quite match his state-of-the-art photographic gear. As he dried his clothes by the fireplace, he explained that he was documenting migratory birds along the coast when his GPS failed and the storm took him by surprise. "Maybe it's a sign for me to stop chasing birds and start photographing rocks," he joked as he warmed up with some whiskey I served. His smile had a kind of familiarity that caught me off guard. I offered him a place to stay until the weather improved, which he accepted gratefully. Over the next few days, we shared the cabin space like two castaways from our former lives. While I worked with wood, Ethan sorted through his photography gear, fixed equipment, and told stories of his work in Patagonia, Alaska, and the Galapagos Islands. His deep voice filled the silent corners of the cabin. We began to share tasks. He cooked surprisingly well for someone who spends months on expeditions. I knew the best fishing spots. Together, we fixed the roof, swapped stories as we cleaned the day's catch, and on the colder nights, we played cards by the fireplace, drinking in a comfortable silence. "Did you run away from something or run toward something?" he asked me one night, while the wind howled outside. The question hung between us like the smoke from our drinks. I realized I didn't really have an answer anymore. The weeks went by and the weather improved, but Ethan never mentioned leaving. I didn't ask either. Although we were strangers, we found a silent understanding that neither of us seemed willing to break. Something inside me began to fear the moment he'd pack up his cameras and leave. The solitude, which had once been so comforting, now felt like a ghost lurking in the background. The morning that changed everything started like so many others. The sunrise painted the ocean in shades of orange and pink as I set out for a walk along the beach. I found Ethan already sitting on the rocks, photographing the morning mist dancing over the waves. There was something different about him. Maybe the way he leaned in toward the camera, completely absorbed, or how the golden light caressed his profile. "Every morning here feels like the first time," he remarked, without ever taking his eyes off the viewfinder. "I can never quite capture exactly what I see." I sat next to him, our shoulders nearly touching. The silence between us seemed to hum with unspoken meaning. "I'm heading on an expedition further north," he said suddenly. "There's a colony of gannets on an isolated island. I need to finish my project on seabirds. I felt an inexplicable tightness in my chest. When are you leaving? Tomorrow, if the weather holds up. That afternoon, the sky darkened quickly. A storm was rolling in, different from the ones before. This one carried an air heavy with expectation. We decided to reinforce the windows and bring more firewood inside before the rain started. We worked side by side, our movements almost in sync, as if we'd been dancing a well-rehearsed routine for years. When we finished, the first gust of wind hit the cabin, making the wooden planks creak. "Looks like it's going to be a long night," I observed while lighting a few more lamps. Ethan moved to the window, watching the dark clouds swallow the horizon. The amber glow from the oil lamps cast long shadows on his face. I found myself memorizing every detail of that profile. "Do you know why I really came to this coast?" he asked, still watching the raging sea. "To photograph migratory birds," I replied automatically. He smiled sideways. "That too. But I also came because I needed to know if I could still feel something beyond the emptiness." His confession, so casually let out between us, hit me like a wave. Suddenly, we were two men, not just sharing a space, but exposing wounds we'd normally kept carefully bandaged. "My 10-year relationship ended a year ago," he continued. "He was a pilot, always moving between airports. One day he just never came back. He said he couldn't fit into the life we'd built anymore." The use of the masculine pronoun hung in the air between us. A revelation Ethan delivered without hesitation, his eyes studying me as if gauging my reaction. I felt my heart race. Not because of the revelation itself, but because of the raw honesty behind it. "I guess we're both running away from something," I admitted as I moved closer. The first thunderclap shook the cabin. The lamp trembled, throwing dancing shadows on the walls. I felt the warmth of Ethan's body close to mine, like a beacon in the growing darkness. "Daniel," he whispered, my name sounding different on his lips. "I'm not so sure I want to leave tomorrow anymore." Our eyes met in the dim light. His dilated pupils reflected the little flames of the lamps. Something primal and undeniable was charged between us. The world outside might have been falling apart under the storm, but inside the cabin, a different kind of tension was building, thick as the air before lightning strikes. "So don't go," I replied, my voice almost drowned out by the roaring wind. I'm not sure who made the first move. Maybe we both acted at the same time, just as everything we did together in that cabin. His fingers found my face, rough from handling equipment but surprisingly gentle. I felt the warmth of his breath on my skin just moments before our lips met. The kiss started hesitantly, a silent question that soon turned into an affirmation. His hands slid down to my neck, while mine snuck under his shirt to feel the heat of his skin against my chilled fingers. A flash of lightning briefly lit up the room, revealing his wide-open eyes, watching me with an intensity that made my whole body respond. In that split second of pure light, I saw something I recognized immediately. Desire, yes, but also a reflection of the same helplessness and need that had been consuming me. Our bodies came together like two drifting continents finally colliding after millennia apart. The storm outside seemed like an echo of what was happening between us. Violent, uncontainable, inevitable. Each thunderclap marked the discovery of a new territory. Every flash of lightning revealed expressions I'd never seen on his face. We lost control and tumbled onto the worn-out sofa. The old piece of furniture protested under our combined weight, but we didn't care. Clothes were thrown off in a desperate hurry, buttons ripped away, fabric tugged aside. Every newly exposed patch of skin was immediately explored with fingers, lips, and tongues. "I've been waiting for this ever since I saw you on that boat," I confessed between gasps. His response was to press his body harder against mine, his weight anchoring me to reality as everything else seemed to float away. We moved together just like the ocean outside, sometimes gentle and rhythmic, other times wild and unpredictable. When our bare skin finally met completely, it was as if two flames had merged into a single, all-consuming fire. The heat between us defied even the cold storm lashing at the windows. Our bodies communicated in a language older than words, a dialogue of sighs, moans, and touches that said everything our mouths couldn't articulate. The world narrowed down to that sofa, to that moment, to exactly where our bodies connected. Like tides rising and falling, we moved in perfect sync. His fingers traced maps along my skin, discovering sensitive spots I never even knew existed, while I explored every inch of his body with the desperate devotion of a castaway who has finally found salvation after years adrift in isolation. When we finally became one completely, It was like two drifting vessels finding an anchor at last. The pleasure built like successive waves, each one more overwhelming than the last, until the climax hit us with the force of a tidal wave, a burst of sensations so intense that for one sublime moment, my entire existence dissolved into that infinite ocean of shared ecstasy. We stayed entwined afterward, our breathing gradually slowing down, our hearts finding a steadier rhythm. The storm still raged outside, but inside our little fortress, a deep peace had settled. "That changes everything, doesn't it?" I finally asked, my fingers idly tracing patterns on his chest. Ethan didn't answer right away. His gaze was fixed on the ceiling, but his hand found mine, interlocking our fingers. "I think some things were meant to change ever since my boat failed near your beach," he eventually said. We lay there in silence, listening as the storm gradually subsided. The first light of morning began to seep through the window cracks when we finally dozed off, still connected as if fearing the other might vanish. I woke up alone. For a disorienting moment, I thought maybe I had dreamed the whole night away, but then I noticed the marks on my skin, the unmistakable traces of his presence. I got up, wrapping a blanket around my waist, and found him on the porch, looking out at the sea which had calmed after the storm. "I thought maybe you'd left," I said, joining him. "I did think about leaving," he admitted, "but I found out I just can't." The rising sun lit up the ocean, turning it into a golden mirror. Debris brought by the storm dotted the beach below us. A comfortable silence fell as we contemplated the transformed landscape. "What we did last night," I began, unsure of how to continue. "It was exactly what we both needed," he finished, turning to look at me. The morning light highlighted every angle of his face. "But it's also complicated." I nodded, understanding the unspoken weight behind those words. "Do you still have to go north?" "The project." He hesitated. "Yeah, I still need to finish it. My living depends on it." I felt a pang of disappointment, but also understanding. "How long will it take? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Gannet colonies don't wait for human existential crises," he said with a half smile. We went back inside. I made some coffee while Ethan checked his equipment, damaged by the salt water. There was a new intimacy in the way we moved, hands lingering a little longer than necessary, looks that communicated more than words ever could. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened between us," said Ethan when we sat down for coffee. "Not just last night, but over these past few weeks." I waited for him to continue, my heart beating faster involuntarily. "I spent years photographing the most extraordinary moments in nature. I captured births, migrations, entire life cycles, and yet," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Even so, nothing prepared me for what I felt when I saw you on the beach, coming to my rescue." His words resonated inside me, echoing feelings I was only beginning to understand. "I'm scared of this," I admitted. "Not what happened, but how much it means. I came here looking for isolation, trying to reconnect with who I was after losing myself in my marriage. And now you're afraid of losing yourself in someone else," he finished. I nodded, grateful for his insight. "I'm not asking us to redefine our lives," Ethan said softly. "I'm just suggesting that maybe instead of running away from what we feel, we can explore it with the same curiosity that we apply to everything else." In the days that followed, we prepped his boat for the journey north. We worked side by side, sharing both the space and our bodies with a natural ease that defied the little time we had known each other. The nights were full of discoveries, whispered confessions in the dark, and stories shared while our bodies recovered to start the dance again. One morning, as we were checking his boat's motor, Ethan expressed a worry that I had been feeling too. "This between us, it's not just about loneliness or convenience, is it?" he asked, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "No," I replied firmly. "It's about finding something I didn't even know I was looking for." The night before he was set to leave, I prepared a special dinner using the fish we had caught together. We opened the last bottle of wine he had brought in his bag. Under the starry sky, sitting on the deck, we talked about the future, not with grand promises, but with cautious possibilities. "After I finish this project, I've got a few months before the next expedition," he mentioned casually. "I was thinking about renting somewhere more permanent. Maine has some great spots for wildlife photographers," I suggested, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the growing hope in my heart. He smiled, understanding what I was really saying. "I've heard this area is especially photogenic." The next morning, we loaded his boat with supplies and equipment. A gentle breeze was blowing from the west, perfect for his trip. 3 weeks, he reiterated, holding my face gently in his hands. "Maybe less if the Gannets cooperate." Our goodbye kiss tasted of coffee, salt, and unspoken promises. As his boat shrank on the horizon, I didn't feel the emptiness I'd expected, but rather a strange certainty. Something had fundamentally changed inside of me, not just because of him, but because of what I discovered about myself through him. In the following days, I returned to my routine, but with a new energy. The workshop came alive with more ambitious projects. I began to sculpt not just miniatures, but larger pieces. A bench for the deck where we could watch the sunset, shelves to hold his photography books alongside my naval architecture ones. 2 weeks and 5 days later, not that I was keeping count, I spotted a familiar boat on the horizon. I dashed to the beach, my heart hammering against my ribs. Ethan jumped off the boat even before it touched the sand completely. His beard was longer, his face a bit more tanned, but his eyes were exactly as I remembered, intense and clear. Did the gannets end up being photogenic? I asked as he approached. Incredibly so, he replied, dropping his backpack on the sand. But not as interesting as a certain sculptor I happen to know. When we embraced on the beach, with the ocean bearing witness to our reunion, I finally understood what I had found in this secluded corner of the coast. It wasn't just an escape from the world, but a gateway to something new. A life defined not by running away, but by deliberate choices. That night, as Ethan showed me the photographs he'd taken, I realized our story was only just beginning. Like a sea that never looks the same twice, we didn't know exactly where this current would take us. But for the first time in a long while, I was excited to find out. I found a small studio to rent in the village, he mentioned offhand, showing me a particularly striking photo of a gannet in full flight. I thought it might be a good spot to display my photos and organize my gear. Or, I suggested, feeling a new kind of courage growing inside me. You could stay here. The cabin is big enough for 2 men, and all that extra photography equipment. His smile lit up the whole room. Do you think we could manage not to drive each other crazy? Maybe we'll drive each other crazy from time to time, I admitted. But I'd rather go a little crazy with you than stay sane alone. Ethan's laugh blended with the sound of the waves outside. Under the same roof that once only harbored my loneliness, we were now building something new. Not an escape, but a beginning. So, if you've ever wondered whether it's possible to find a connection in the most unexpected places, or if you've thought about leaving everything behind to start over, maybe my story can serve as a bit of inspiration. Sometimes, a storm doesn't just come to destroy, but to clear the way for something completely new. It's amazing how life can turn around completely when you least expect it. If this story touched you in any way, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe for more tales like this. Share in the comments if you've ever experienced a coincidence that totally changed your path. Remember, sometimes, the shipwrecks in life take us exactly where we're meant to be.